Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's so nice to have you here for this extraordinary event, one that I'm very excited about, a conversation with activist, pastor, writer, a civil rights hero, and a very close friend of mine, Dr. John Perkins. So welcome to all of you. I would like to say at this point, if you have a cell phone, if you don't mind turning it off or muting it or whatever you can do to keep it from ringing in the middle of a very important moment in the conversation. John M. Perkins is the founder of the Voice of Calvary Ministries in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Mendenhall, and the founder of the John M. Perkins Foundation for Reconciliation and Development in Pasadena, California, and in Jackson. Dr. Perkins was born into a Mississippi sharecroppers family in 1930 and has been the recipient of a Ford Foundation grant and fellowship. He has lectured at hundreds of colleges and universities around the United States, including Harvard, Stanford, and now UVA. A third grade dropout, he has been awarded 13 honorary doctorates. Over the years of his influential ministry, Dr. Perkins has appeared as a speaker at the Billy Graham Crusades and at the Urbana Youth Leadership Conferences, and has served on the boards of such organizations as Bread for the World, Koinonia Partners, and the National Black Evangelical Association. His writings on faith, racial reconciliation, and poverty have appeared frequently in Sojourners and in a variety of evangelical and mainline publications. His memoir, Let Justice Roll Down, published in 1976, became a religious bestseller, an achievement inspired in part by the accolades of Oregon Senator Mark Hatfield, who referred to Dr. Perkins as a modern saint. Among his numerous works, I would also want to mention the important book on social theology and community building called A Quiet Revolution, which my class this semester is reading, and all of the participants in the Spring Institute for Lived Theology are reading. And I will also shamelessly note that Dr. Perkins and I have recently co-authored a book, which will be published by InterVarsity Press in September, and has been, for me, I would say, the happiest collaboration of my writing life. In his 8th decade, he continues to be a prophetic voice for rebuilding of distressed and excluded communities. In December 2005, in protest in Washington, D.C. against cuts to food stamps, he was arrested with a number of other Christian activists in an event organized by Call to Renewal for blocking the entrance to a congressional office building. Today, he serves as the #1 cheerleader for the John M. Perkins Foundation, where his youngest daughter, Elizabeth, is the executive director. And I would like to say how wonderful it is having you here this evening, Ms. Perkins. If you could stand up and acknowledge your presence. Thank you. I would also like to point out that Dr. Perkins' grandson, Jonathan Perkins, is a first-year law student at the University of Virginia. I met Jonathan when you were 4 or 5 years old, running around Antioch, the son of the late Spencer Perkins, a dear friend of mine, and to many of you. Nice to have you, Jonathan. Give a shout. So it is with great delight that I welcome you to the University of Virginia, and I look forward to this conversation. I would like to say that the format of tonight's event will be conversational, but hopefully it will be an opportunity for Dr. Perkins to tell his remarkable story, which some of you know, many of you don't. All of us would like to hear again. A brief overview, if you will. We will have a 45 or 50-minute time of conversation, and then we'll have another half hour for questions and answers. During that period, we'll have ushers in both aisles who will need to give you a microphone before you ask a question. So thank you again for being here.
Can I say a word before you?
That,
Wow. Well, I'm really honored to be here. Outside of my coming to faith in Christ and marrying Vera Mae and her giving me this heritage of 8 children and 13 grand and 2 great-grand, my friends, I live at the mercy and thanksgiving and the gratitude of my friends. And I've been doing this now for 48, 9 years. I'm not angry with any of them, and I have lived at the grace of it. Sometimes I'm misunderstood because of the gratitude and the freedom that my friends have made for me. And I would consider you folks here to be some of those friends, and some of them I'm looking at them in the room here, and others. And so, and I would, it's a great freedom, and I might get to that tonight, that I think the reason I've been able to persevere in life, I think some folks will call it success, but I call it perseverance, has been because of the freedom and the support and the restraint, and the relationships have been deep enough that I could hear them and be in a sort of a fellowship with them. So I consider being here with you is a great honor. You honors me, and I like all of these other honors. I have to tell the truth about that. But the real honor goes to my friend, and I take that from this passage. Give, and to me it's myself and my faith. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, will people, human, man, give back. It has not been a miracle in my friendship. It has been real people who have really been involved, and I'm just absolutely, and some of the drive that I have now is at 78 is a greater drive. I get the same energy. I think I was been moved by the issues, the problems, the poverty, the oppression, the injustice. I think I've been moved by that, and I think that drove me along. I don't know whether or not that is the driving force in my life now. I think maybe the driving force in my life has been my friends who have allowed me to do that. And so I think I'm living more now in gratitude. I think that gets me up in the morning. That pushes me, that I've had these almost 50 years at the whole absolute grace. And my kids went to college. Now my grandkids, like Jonathan and others, are going to college. So it haven't been my friends have not let me down. And so you really honors me in being here, for me being here, but for you being here with me tonight. I just want to say that. And I consider you Mark, I consider you Charles, and of course Mark. And it's been that quality. It's been that quality of friends that have caused me to be able to persevere, has both freed me and restrained me because of their love. And so I just thank you for being here, having me.
Dr. Perkins, you were born in 1930, the sixth child to Maggie Perkins, the fifth to survive, and raised on cotton plantations in Simpson County. You wrote in your wonderful memoir, Let Justice Roll Down, that your earliest memory is of a winter afternoon and a close gray sky and a small house on the dirt road. And in the memory, your grandmother sits inside the house sewing a quilt to keep the children warm. You're standing in the front yard chopping wood for the fire, occasionally carrying small bundles of sticks to the porch. Your family farmed on halves, moving from plantation to plantation with the changing seasons according to the shifting demands for cheap labor. And like most rural African American children, you were put to work in the fields, picking cotton alongside your grandmother, aunts, cousins, and sisters, waking up before first light and returning home after sunset. From September through November, riding to and from work in large open-bodied trucks, as you wrote in the memoir, just like hogs and cattle. Can you share with us a sense of what the world looked like to you as a child coming of age in this brutal and oppressive society?
Let me see where to start here. You might want to ask me the question again. No, for focus, because again, I got all of that very clear in my mind. I love hot weather. I could have lived in the California desert. I think it's because of the harshness and the kind of shacks that we lived in. The plantation type houses that had one boarded up and another board. When that board would come off the house, the ice chickers in the winter would be on the inside the house as well as outside the house. And the misery of being cold and the misery of standing by the fireplace, all of those things was vivid to me. But I think what had come alive, and I think came alive when I was writing with Justice for All, I Let Justice Roll Down. I was talking to an old lady who had been living in the community on the same plantation, no, on another plantation, when I was born. And they talked about my mother died of a disease that had to do with nutrition deficiency, and they wrote on a birth certificate. In fact, that disease has been eradicated. And I was drinking, I was sucking her breath right up until she died, probably taking the nutrition that she needed for her own survival. And then she died, and said this old lady who found her later down the streets, who they did have a milk cow. We didn't have a milk cow because the plantation owner would not allow his people to have milk cows on the plantation. But then she started giving me, bringing down for me, this lady tells me this, a quart of milk. And they began, I was nothing but skin and bone, and she began to see me recover. And I remember her telling me that when we were doing the research. And I said to the lady, by this time, you know, I'm pretty well known. I said, what happened to her? And then she tells a story in my hometown about this lady dying a slow death because they didn't have a doctor, and there hadn't been a doctor in 12 years in my hometown of New Hebron. And I just sort of said that will come to an end. Of course, we built a health center there. But I guess one of the things that confronts me each day of my life is that, you know, I sort of got a funny feeling of looking forward to heaven, because I'd never seen a picture of my mother. And then, of course, with Spencer being there, you know, I don't see it as a bad deal. But what drives me too is, I imagine she's going to say to me, my mother, what did you do for other people like me? I think, what did you do for other people like me? I think that's, so this idea of the poor is so deeply rooted. I'm not poor. I haven't been poor since I was an adult, and we'll talk more about that. I was bent on breaking out of that, but I think that that is a big driving force, because I would like for her to say too, well done. Naturally, I want Jesus to say it, but I would like for her to say it too. So I think now I'm ready for the question.
I think that was
I think it's that kind of
wonderful
poverty.
answer.
It's that kind of poverty. It's that kind of condition, and it's also driving me now toward the Mississippi Delta, because now we have a whole generation of people who was victims of that kind of poverty, and that they who was much like me, did not get an education, and that now they are in desperate need. Mississippi Delta probably represent the, in a sense, a little different from the Native American reservation because of the shape of them, because they're in the little towns in Mississippi. So that is another one of the driving concerns that I have.
Dr. Perkins, the folks who created this evil system called Jim Crow, Southern segregation, were by and large white folks who called themselves Christians. And I'm wondering, as a child and a young man, if you thought about that. When you passed a white church, did you think, what's going on in that place? And how you came to terms with that fact?
Well, I don't think I think early on, because we too, our family was, while we was sharecroppers, we was also bootleggers and gamblers. And so we did not see, I did not see religion early on as relevant, to society. And I could not understand why black folk was Baptists, because all the white folk were Baptists. Early on I would see all these signs, religion tonight, these revival at all these white big churches. Everybody's welcome. Well, if I done went there, it'd have been a ride. So early on, I sort of felt about the church, the totality of the church, because black folks, when I did go, we was not religious people now, so I didn't have much contact with the environment, because for us it was sort of written off, but also our own desire to explore our people, but with moonshine and tobies and bootlegging and gambling. I did not see religion as being relevant to the behavior of our people. So I sort of saw it about the same way as Karl Marx saw it. I didn't know enough about, I didn't know Karl Marx. I learned about that later. But I think I would have been the same way by religion, that it was, that's been affirmed. It was all of the outstanding killings in Mississippi was always a Baptist minister involved in it. They just convicted one, the last one a few months ago. And so I did not get the virtue of religion, neither did I see the meaning of it until after I came to Christ when I was 27. So I didn't think of it in terms of religious. I didn't see what, I thought of it was black folks struggling for emotional dignity and an outlet for their pent-up emotion. White folks using it to reaffirm their plantation ownership. So I did not see the virtue in religion.
In 1947, your brother was murdered by a police officer in the town of New Hebron. He had returned home from the World War II, Purple Heart and decorated war veteran, survived extensive combat wounds, and he died in your arms as your uncle, I think, searched for a hospital that would treat African Americans. You said in your memoir, Let Justice Roll Down, that your mind was frozen into a numbing blankness, and then after that there was rage and anger, and you resolved to leave Mississippi once and for all. You ended up in the coastal town of Southgate, California, and found work at the Union Pacific Foundry And after the war, after the Korean War, you and Vera Mae settled in Monrovia, California, and you gave yourself fully to your twin ambitions, making money and forgetting the bad memories of life in the Deep South. You got a job as a janitor in a supermarket chain called Shopping Bag, and you so impressed the company owner with your work ethic that you soon moved up to the welding shop and eventually to the equipment design. Settling into the comforts of the black middle class and a spacious new home, you tried not to think too much about Mississippi and the life you had escaped. So why on earth did you and your family move back to Mississippi in 1960?
Yeah, it was yeah, that's a good question. When I came to faith, you need to know a little bit about that. Growing up without a mother, growing up without a father in my life, growing up in a big extended family. My grandmother had been the mother of 19 children. We was not influenced by Christianity, so the whole idea of so many of my cousins would be three brothers, or brothers and sisters. They would all have different fathers, different names, but at least they had their mother. And my mother was dead, and my daddy dropped the five of us off there. My grandmother ended up giving away three of them because she just had too many. And in the family there, and my thought. What was the question? It's all
Why did you move back?
Okay. Well, what happened then when I came to faith? I know what I was going to say now. That I think my behavior is on the plantation when they would ask somebody to go get water or go do something, I would always run to get it. And if they asked me to do something, because I liked the affirmation that you would get for obedience. And what I discovered was the morning that I came to faith in Jesus Christ, I discovered what was missing in my life and what was my driving force. I was desiring to be loved. I had never felt the deep love. I find that with my grandchildren. I find it with my own children. I find it sometimes, I think I do better with my grandkids than I did my own kids. I find it difficult I want to do it, and I think I do it, I embrace, but I have to intentionally reach out in love. And so I think what was my driving force in life was to be loved. And that Sunday morning, and of course, I'm not a very religious guy, so I don't use words like the Holy Spirit told me and those kind of, I don't use that kind of language. That Sunday morning, though, I know it was God who did that. It was that Galatian passage that would just compound to me as the good news of the gospel. When Paul said, I have been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ live in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me. By this time, I recognized that Christ had died, of course, for the sin of the world, but it wasn't necessarily for me. But that morning, I realized that there was a God in heaven who loved me. And it felt like to me that God embraced me. And I was afraid for this God because I was so contaminated and so sinful. And he loved me. He loved me. He gave himself for me. I think the longing of my life was met. I think probably have a lot to do with my motivation. The longing, I felt what I'd been missing. I felt that I was loved by a holy God. And I think that affected me in every area of my life. And so after my conversion then to Christ, there were some businessmen in our town. I got connected with them through a lot of events. I got connected, and it was at a crucial time. See, I was converted in 1957, and in 1957 is when there was a pivot revival going on within the Southern California. In fact, that's where Billy Graham struck it rich, there in Southern California, in the midst of that revival. But it was also what was a part of that revival that made it unique. It was after World War II, the missionaries had gone back to Africa and all over the world. And when I was converted, it was during that time of their furlough. So when I was converted in that environment, there was this passion among the missionaries that was coming back for the black people in Africa. And I had thought when I was converted, see, I didn't know nothing about the church. I didn't understand all of that. And I had not had very much black church experience, not any white church experience, of course. But when I was converted and coming from my background, I thought that what it meant to be a Christian was to be one in Jesus Christ. It was a pivot time. It was a moment. It was an environment. It was a people. And they embraced me. It was like they were sensing that there was no blacks in their environment. And for me, I thought that's what, I'm living in the black community, and I thought that's what it meant now to be a Christian in society. And then these men would go up, these businessmen would go up on the Sunday morning. This is why I came back to Mississippi. I would go up on a Sunday morning to the prison camps in the San Dimas Mountain out there in Southern California. They got just massive of those camps out there. And when I went there, they asked me to come and give my testimony there. And I went there, and I shared my background, a little of the testimony you'll hear today and tomorrow. And when they were speaking, when I was speaking, right as I got to the end of my talk, probably about 15-minute talk or less, it was it was too many black people there. You know, I was in suburbia L.A. I wasn't in L.A. So it was in Arcadia, Monrovia. That area was a suburbia, wealthy area of town, somewhat for blacks and white, pretty wealthy out there, you know. And so, but when I went there, I saw that 80 or 90% of those people were young black people. That sort of horrified me. I sort of thought of prison as old men and people like that. And here was all these black kids there. And then as I was speaking and was sharing my testimony, two of those young black people, boys in the back, they must have been about 13, they would just begin to cry and to shake, cry and to shake. This was like my first time. I'm just now sharing my own life. And they were so crying and shaking, so I didn't know what had happened to them. And as soon as I sit down, I went back there and sit between them. And I asked them, what's wrong? What's wrong? And they said, when you were sharing your testimony, you were describing my own life. I grew up without a father. And here they was in prison. And here they was speaking my language. I could hear that. They was a family from the South like me, speaking this sort of Ebonic like I could speak. And then I realized then that I had lived in Mississippi for all the years. I'm not faulting the church because I hadn't exposed myself to it either. But I hadn't heard this good news that Christ could deliver. And God made that transfer into those guys' lives. And it was the first time in my life that I realized that sharing the gospel, that it was possible that God could transform, and take what I had shared and affect other people's lives. This was a discovery. And then I began to say, who is it like me? I'm a third grade dropout. Who is it like me, and where can I go? And so I began to feel this burden, and by this time, I was a little bit successful, had a nice home, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that was a motivating force. Emmett Till had been killed, and there had been a whole revival of the need in the South. In my Christian experience, again, woke up my own brother's experience. And somehow or another, and I think two things might have happened to me, and I try to sort this out because I'm doing this all the time. I try to sort this out. I think, too, that when you're striving for something all your life and discover that you have found it, love, I think you need a new challenge. I think that this idea of Jesus saying, if anyone come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me, I think it's a part of a building challenge. And I think I was fulfilled. There's a song that helps that. I can't sing, but it goes something like this. Hallelujah, I have found him whom my soul so long had tried. Jesus satisfied my longing, and through his blood I'm now saved. I think it was a need for a challenge. I think it was a need to enter into. I think I was free enough from myself. And I think my little bit of hard work and a little bit of accumulation gave me a little confidence that I was free and that now I could do something. And so it didn't become, it will read out like a sacrifice. And what didn't make it a sacrifice is that Vera may eventually join with me. And then I felt the absolute confidence. I don't make many decisions. You might see it. I don't make many decisions without Vera May saying yes to it. And so she gave me that extra stamina that we can do this. We can do this. So I think it was a combination of a burden, passion. It was a combination. Passion is putting yourself in the same situation that other people are in. And so I think those boys did it that morning, and they got that kind of exchange that I had got one morning. And so I think that was somewhat of the call of God upon my life. And so I didn't go back with any civil rights ambition. I went back really to share Christ, to make this, to see whether that transfer could happen, that it happened to me. Could that happen, and it happened to those boys? Could I go back and live among the people and see that transfer happen? So that was my call.
I'm very interested, and thank you. I'm very interested in your vision for faith and justice when you returned in 1960 to Mississippi. Spencer told me one time, your son, in a conversation, when we returned to Mississippi in 1960, we weren't trying to raise any ruckus. And yet by 1963, of course, 64, Mississippi was becoming the spotlight of the civil rights movement. Bob Moses and others in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee said that our mission is to crack, the iceberg of Southern segregation. And Mississippi was the solid-most core of the iceberg of Southern segregation, so civil rights movements came south for that amazing 1964 Freedom Summer Project. You once said that when you came back to Mississippi, you didn't have a holistic gospel. You found it sometime after you got back. And I'm very interested to know, what is a holistic gospel? and what influenced your move to that gospel?
And I think Mark did a great job this afternoon, Mark Garnett, in terms of that relocation and what that means, that it become contextual, and that you put yourself back into the community of the people, and their needs become your needs within that neighborhood and community. Well, when I got back to Mississippi, now given my background, those men who I went to prison camp with, those successful businessmen, they almost like when I got ready to leave to come back home, they're the ones who undergirded me with small amounts of resources. Later, another church picked up my support, but these guys undergirded me to go back there, and they was predominantly white people. And I got back, so given my discipleship, it was an old Presbyterian theologian who discipled me. And I have defined Christianity as being discipling. We have redefined it today. It don't mean the same as it meant with Jesus. With Jesus, it meant being mentored, being discipled, and then developing some biblical principles within your life. So I was discipled by him. And what was the question again now?
You said that you didn't come back to Mississippi with a holistic
I
gospel,
got
but a
it.
number of things happened in those first few years that made you move from a gospel that's with a sole emphasis on personal salvation to a holistic gospel.
Right. So I went back there thinking, okay, that the gospel could burn through those racial barriers. Then I faced the harsh reality. I became a friend of the First Baptist pastor, Dr. Odenwald, in town. And by this time now, in about 64, and this was the hottest time, the 3 civil rights workers had been killed, the voters' right thing was the long hot summer and all of that. I had discovered, and I was working in the public school in the sense I was doing chapel program. The school was all segregated, and they was brand new buildings and new things. And for the first time, they were going from those 1 and 2 room houses to having a teacher for every class and consolidating them. And so I got involved with 15 high schools and 2 junior colleges on a monthly basis of going there, having what we call, some place we call it chapel, sometimes we call it like the recess period, that they would gather them in the gym, and that was a big thing back there in Mississippi. But I began to watch and to see the behavior of our people, and the fact that my people had developed, given the misery and the poverty, I want you to understand, and the hopelessness of our people, they tied education to leaving Mississippi and going north and getting a job. They didn't tie education to their economic condition in Mississippi. And so you would go to somebody's house and they would have all these pictures of these kids on the mantelpiece over the fireplace where they have graduated. And you look down in the house and the pigs and the chickens and the cracks and the coal was there. But they would be bragging about the fact that their children are now in Chicago, New York, or somewhere else. And I could see that education wasn't tied to the reality of the now. And then as it went north, it became tied to how you could look when you came back to Mississippi, what kind of car you was driving. And so it become tied to an upwards, a symbolic of success, not with any concrete ownership of any assets within a community. So it was no way tied to economic development. It was tied to consumerism and the way things looked and the way you looked. and that you looked like you was prosperous in society. And so that was a short trip then to prosperity theology from there. And so I began to see what was happening. I remember I said to Vera Mae, by this time we done started a little movement and a little Bible Institute, we call it, and Bible studies and Sunday school. We started that. We hadn't started church at this point. And that's when I said to Vera Mae one night, this is when it sort of hit me, because I'm worried about these kids that I'm working with. They're going to succeed, but they're going to leave, and I have to keep doing that over again, And I said to my wife, I said, honey, if we're going to make a difference in Mendenhall, and that's all I was concerned about right then, if we're going to make a difference in Mendenhall, this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to stay in this little town long enough that we can win some of these young people to Jesus Christ. We got to disciple them in their faith. We got to help them get a love for God, a love for themselves, and a love for the community. That's a bigger love than consumerism and materialism. We're going to help them stay in school, go off to college, get some skills, and bring those skills back to the community. And Vera Mae went to crying. And she said, I will never have another house. She saw the significance of that commitment. Well, the first thing I did was that we then, with the guys, Dolphus and Otis and Melvin and all those, we built her a house, a nice house in the community. We got a framing company to come and develop the shell, and we developed the rest of it. The only two-story house still in the black community of Mendenhall. But then about that same time, I met, now I has an idea. An idea didn't hit me. And then I met First Baptist pastor. And then I met a Presbyterian pastor in another town. And I began to talk to the Baptist pastor at Mendenhall, Dr. Onwall, about what I was going to do. And he heard it, and he was born in the Mississippi Delta, so he could relate to me. And he had been off to college, university, has probably a master's degree in theology. And what made us friends, because that's the big hurdle, the greatest hurdle in the South was that imperialism and racism was so tied together that they could not think that a black person could be equal enough with them that would make the friendship. It would always be a patronizing situation, because reconciliation assumes equality. Everything else is patronizing. Everything else, the first truth is that we create an image of God, each one of us. And so, but somehow we became friends. I think this is what happened. Because I had been discipled, I think I might have been the first black probably he'd ever listened to theologically, because you don't listen to black preachers for what they say. That was brought out in Jeremiah Wright. The white folk, that was the first time they ever listened to a black preacher. They don't go to black churches to hear what they say. They go there to do the music and for some other reason. But in my case, with this friend, I was the first person that he probably ever met that understood theology as well as him, and that sort of shocked him. And only because I'd been discipled in the biblical foundational truth, and the Bible somewhat holds together if you've been discipled. And so what happened is this gave us a friendship. Not only it gave us a friendship and probably an emotional friendship, and it was a friendship in terms of mission. And that's where friendship that ought to be the end of friendship, ought to be for Christians. In the friendship ought to be mission together. And so he wanted to help me do that. It wasn't a threat either, because that's a 10-year process I just outlined. and so it wasn't a threat. And he wanted to help me. And he was so passionate with it, he began to go back to his church like any good pastor would and try to get his people softened up for it. But they heard him too clearly, and they rejected him, and he committed suicide. A few months later, my Presbyterian friend also committed suicide. That's when I began to see what slavery and segregation and racism had destroyed white folks too. I think we wasn't operating on that basis. We didn't know what we was fighting against. You know. And what I could see that the white people had taken this precious gospel, this love of God, this gospel that's supposed to reconcile people to God and to each other across racial and social barriers. We had taken that gospel and we put it into our racial culture in a way that the gospel had lost its power, and that we had accommodated racism and bigotry within the church. We accommodated the very central truth of the gospel, that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself. And it was the pain then of me losing the hope that I realized could be realized. Because in California, I had experienced that for a little while, for 3.5 years after my conversion. And now, so my passion became not just for those, and of course I'm passionate, and you'll hear about that later, about the socioeconomic condition. But now I'm passionate about this force, the blindness of this force that is holding us there. And it was the church that was holding us there. And so that's when I became passionate for that. And there was other incidents like that. And so it was, back to Mark Garnett, it was in the crisis of the situation. And I had believed in God and in the Bible when I went back there. Now, these kind of things then test your faith. Then you begin to talk about what to do with it. And what forces I want to join. Well, the dynamics of some of the dynamic of the civil rights movement, of course, was John Lewis, culture with Moses, culture with all these other guys you don't know that was absolutely committed. The kids who dropped out of university gave their life to the civil rights movement. But of course, the young Jewish people, with Israel now having become a nation, and the Zionist movement is going back, and that they had missed the Holocaust, and that these young Jewish people, they wasn't bringing their Jewish faith, they was bringing their deep commitment, social commitment, but they didn't have any Christian faith, and most of them was young atheists, wonderful people, wonderful Jewish people, young atheists. I would have probably been atheist too if I'd have been a Jew over there, and seeing what happened there in the Catholic Church, accommodating to that Holocaust.
Third Reich.
Yeah, you see, I probably would have been, and those guys come, but they didn't have any faith, and to a certain degree, it was undermining the historical faith of those young, black, talented young folks who was joining with them. And so I think it's in that condition then I began to formulate it. I was motivated deeply by my faith. I was motivated by their commitment, and I'm over competitive. I guess you know that. I have to conceal my competitive behavior. I'm over competitive. And so I thought that Christianity could be as good as those wonderful Jewish people. I thought my Christian faith could be as good as those black Muslims that was emerging on the scene. I thought my faith had to be involved as much as their faith. So I think that that's where I was trying to maintain my faith that motivated me, that brought me there, that gave me my meaning, that freed me from my own individual prosperity and success, and it put me in the midst of that. I want to keep that in life. And then there was a morality of it. These young men would fight for civil rights all day and sleep with somebody's wife during the night. And so all of those kind of realities, that was a part of my struggle, but I was wanting my faith to be the compelling element. It was the compelling element because I think I had found my meaning. I had found love, and I knew what it was, and that love was in Jesus Christ, and that love was for each other. That we make love a deal that hangs out there, but it's that love for each other. Though I have the gift of prophecy on everything, but don't have love for each other. Not just love for each other. And that's what I wanted to show. So I think that's what drove me to the sense of wholeness. And, I always tell the story about, me working for 15 cents, and when I really began to discover that justice was an economic stewardship issue. So that's what it was, trying to maintain my faith. And of course later when I got locked in jail and beat up, I had to struggle with my faith again. So my faith have come to crisis, and in the midst of the crisis, I haven't found a lot of contradictions in the Word of God. You have to go stretch at a heart to allow find racism as the reality within the New Testament. It's not there.
Dr. Perkins. Fannie Lou Hamer, your friend, the great civil rights saint, once said about those volunteers who came down in 1964, many of whom were humanists or secularists or atheists, Jewish, from all other traditions and convictions, that if I had to choose between the white evangelical churches of Mississippi and these heroic, Christ-like, this is the term she used, men and women who came down from the South to help out, I would choose these people because even though they come to the work of justice by other names, they understand what is really at stake here. I want to touch on something that you said as we move through your story, and thank you so much for your time here and for the gift of your presence and your wisdom. By the late 1960s, the shape of your ministry in Mississippi had now sort of included the double punch of salvation and social justice. Salvation as personal faith in Christ and engagement in the world for justice. And at one point you said, social action fleshes out the lordship of Christ. The grace that frees is the grace that forms. And then in the fall of 1969, you organized a selective buying campaign, a boycott, in the town of Mendenhall against white businesses that were discriminating against African Americans, and you paid
and beaten up.
They
missed that sometime. We missed that. A young black man had been locked in jail, beaten for supposedly having called a white woman on the phone and asking her for a date, and they had took him to jail and beat him, and we went up to see him, and all of that sort of grew out of that.
And by the time you ascended those steps in 1969 in Simpson County to say, as Ms. Hamer said, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, your journey had come a long way, and you paid a price for that courage. In February of 1970, as you mentioned, you were tortured and beaten nearly to death by a mob of white racist police officials in a jail cell in the town of Brandon, Mississippi. And while recovering from these injuries in Mound Bayou at the Tufts Medical Center, you had a kind of vision of Jesus on the cross And you said I might go so far as to say that I experienced a second conversion while I lay in that hospital bed. It was a conversion of love and forgiveness. Well, I don't want to exploit your generosity and revisit a traumatic experience and to bring those bad memories back. But I wonder if you would be so kind as to talk about the transformations in your life that followed from your arrest and your beating and your recovery.
Yeah, when my two white friends committed suicide, I committed myself word-wise and open, probably, I know testimony-wise, maybe not open, but that I was going to work for reconciliation. Mm-hmm. Though the months following that, I sort of neglected that for the development of dolphins and artists and those kids in the community. And I left the racial thoughts out. And I think it was that night in that Brandon jail when I was being tortured, that came back to me again, that they had culturalized the gospel. And I made that commitment in jail. And I realized that I was bribing God as I look back. And I think we do that when we get caught in the track. I think we think that we have to bribe God. And it's okay, God can take it. And so I said, God, if you allow me out of this jail tonight, when I saw the behavior of those people, they looked like monsters. They looked like horror out of the night as they tortured us. And especially as people torture people, the Abu Ghraib come out, that they always torture them sexually. And so they tortured us in that jail. And that's when I said to God, if you allow me to get out of here alive, which I didn't think I would, then I want to preach a gospel that is stronger than my race. I want to preach a gospel that is stronger than my economic interests. I want to preach a gospel that can reconcile black and whites together. As soon as I got out of that jail, I wanted to forget about that. I didn't want to hear that anymore. But then when I was in the Mount Bayou Hospital, recovering from the surgery and all of that was affecting me in the beating, I wanted to read my Bible, but I couldn't. And almost every time I would open my Bible, it would come to this place in Matthew, unless you can forgive those who trespass against you, how do you expect your Heavenly Father to forgive you? And that haunted me. That haunted me. Now, I could feel like I'm a hero now. But after I got out, and a few years later, we moved to Mendenhall, moved to Jackson. And the crime was so severe in our neighborhood. It was this period when blacks were moving in and whites were moving out. And, they call that the time of integration, from the time the first black move in, the last white move out. And so integration was taking place in my community. And the crime was just totally violent. And so what I did was, I got a tent and began to put the tent in people's yards, big houses, garage yards, putting a tent in different places. And then the policemen all heard about that. And of course, at that point, you got 99% white policemen. And one of these men, policemen, was a big guy, overfat policeman, wrinkle, that's where people call white folks cracker because of the rancor that comes there, a Southern. And so he looked like everything that was stereotyped, and he wore a police suit. And that was the hardest thing after being beaten, is to see a, making a long story short, he made a relationship with me. He did anything I would ask him to do. He would send the policemen to escort the people home. He surrounded that tent every time with his police force. He drew out of me some hatred with his own love and his own deeds of love in that community. God is an incarnation of God. He lives his will out through people. And so I could be heroic. Y'all put that in the books. Y'all write about that period. But it was people who came along beside of me who embraced my mission. It was always my mission. It's been the weakness out of a great movement like Promise Keepers, a great movement. It never got to creative mission. It stayed in stadiums. And they cried and said wonderful, wonderful stuff. So I'm not putting that down. But we didn't move it to the passion did not move itself into the pain of the people. This old man moved in. In fact, Lim was almost being killed by one of those robbers. Yeah, who replaced me. That was some of the violence that was taking place in that time. And so that began to, again, what I had done with my brother being killed, I think when I got to California, become working in the mainstream, became a leader, in the business manufacturing world. I think I knew this could happen. I knew we could work together as a people. And so this old man come there, and it was him who helped me through that period. And it was his love for me that helped to take some of he bore some of my pain. See, great leaders for social change, I'm just thankful for social change, enter into the pain of the people who have the pain, and they bear that pain with the people in the pain. That's Mahatma Gandhi. That's Martin Luther King. That's all the great, that's Cesar Chavez. Leadership today, that's the Apostle Paul. That's Jesus. And leadership today removes you from the pain. And the reason, again, Mark, he entered into the pain of Sandtown. I lived in his house. I wouldn't have lived in that house.
But why should you have to forgive those men in that Brandon jail?
It was for my own healing. I'm in the hospital, man. I'm in the hospital. I want to read the Bible again. I still believe it. And I don't want it convicting me anymore. I don't want it telling me what I'm supposed to do. I still believe it.
So you felt a call to bear witness to the gospel to those men, to your oppressors, to the...
You're making me a hero. You're making me a hero. He was called to join me in the violence of Jackson. Yes, it worked that way. But it ain't that way. It ain't that way. Ain't no hero. What makes a hero is they enter into the pain of the people and they do what they know to do at that moment. It was no accident that this pilot landed that plane on the Hudson. You can see he had the integrity and the skills to do that anyway. He became a hero because he done it in the midst of the crisis. And so we're not as heroic as we make. I think it's a matter of us entering into the pain of the people. That's the Moses. Those are the visions you see in the Old Testament prophet. Hosea marries a woman because Israel was in adultery. God wanted to show him the pain that he feels for his people. That's what he said to Moses. And that's the pain I feel today is for 7% of the black community, kids who are growing up without any father in their life is committing 60% of the crime in our community. This problem is manageable. We could do something about it. 97% of all the black kids in prison come from a family where there's no father. We have done the analysis. The policemen tonight know where the crime is going to take place. It took place there last Saturday night. The church don't have the will, and that we have also accepted a prosperity theology. And the church is to follow Christ, that he bore our sins in his body. He suffered with us and for us. Leadership, he called Moses to go back into the pain of the people he led. He called Gandhi to go back into the pain of the people he led. And it was out of that pain that Mandela, 28 years in the prison, could come back and come up with a truth and reconciliation instead of violence for his people, because he had experienced the pain. I want you to know that we're living in a hideous situation. Churches in my urban community are becoming Dr. Dollars and becoming Prosperity and becoming T.J. Jakes and becoming this. And it's shy. It looks like it's well, but it's bringing all the prosperity to me. And we haven't made that a collective effort to deal with the misery that our people are suffering from. The highest cause of death in my community is another black person killing another black person in our neighborhood. And the church can't mount anything about that in our society. So we got a pain here that the church is not identifying with in our society. We're building big buildings, and we're buying airplanes, and we're buying Bentleys even, and we're not concerned about the pain. We as blacks are the wealthiest seniors that ever lived on this world. We blacks right now. Now, we might not be that way tomorrow. The next generation might not be. But we retired from Ford. We retired from IBM. We retired as teachers. And most of that money go to the casinos. Go to the casinos. So there is no thought pattern. And of course, the white church became right-wing and accommodated these robbers. The Lehman Brothers president making $400 million last year as his salary. If a welfare black woman would have took too many food stamps, it would have been all over the papers. But the so-called white church has no voice to put that on. Has no voice to put that on. And so these robbers put the whole country at risk. And some of the nations are mad with us because the greed of America is what brought the whole system down in our society. And you don't hear a word about that in the church. You don't have a word about that. So this is a serious situation, and it's big enough that our little social welfare ain't going to solve this problem. It's a big problem in our world, and instead of us entering into it, people are now saving more than they saved before this inflation. Our savings have just went up. And we're talking about 85% of our people is not hurt. They're making the same much money they made before November. But they're not giving it. They're not investing. We're in a crisis. We're in a crisis. And it's a crisis of faith. It's a crisis of not having a prophetic witness to our society. And our little charity ain't adequate for the problem. Our little charity is not adequate for the problem. It's going to take the Mark Garnett type. It's going to take the people who are willing to move in and suffer with the people, with the problem in our society.
Dr. Perkins, I have just one more question, and then, if you don't mind, I'd like to open this conversation up to people in the audience. I just want to note that a former governor and U.S. senator from your home state and my home state, Mississippi, said often in his political rallies during your childhood and adolescence that this is strictly a white man's country. I'm thinking of old Bilbo. On November 4th, 2008, our nation elected Barack Obama as president, first African-American president in our history. And I would love it if you would share your feelings and impressions of that historic day.
Let me share what I share, and this will be the end. I was asked that question the Sunday following his election, and I was in Southern California in Redondo Beach. I will tell you how I felt that morning. And I began to feel that way when my daughter ran down the steps at 10 o'clock and said, Obama has been elected president. This is what I did that Sunday morning. This is the way I felt. These are words. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven reign. Reign with the harmony of liberty. Let I rejoice and rise, high as the lifting skies. Let it resound, loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, our new day begun. But let us march on till victory is won. Stony the roads we trod, bitter the chase and rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet fainted, Luhama, come to the place which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that tears have been watered, We have come, tracing the past through the blood of the slaughter. Out from that gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright light, of our bright star, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all man is created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, where our bright star had cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the path where God, where we met thee, lest our heart, drunk with the dope and the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadows beneath our wing, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. That morning, what I wanted to do, I live in a very populated community where I live. Well, that morning I wanted to go out in the streets, and if I could have sang that morning, I would have lifted up my voice and I would have sang, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sang, land where my fathers died, land where all those slaves plowed. From every mountainside, I would say this morning that freedom is reigning." That's the way I felt. I felt what Martin Luther King said, free at last. Free and I feel that now. I feel that freedom. Nobody, no white folks need to do nothing else for me. No black folks need to do nothing else for me. We can join together. We can join together and do something. We're free. Now, many of us don't know that. We still need to be patronized. Think we got to be patronized. Obama represents something different from that. He represents a person is not judged by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. That's different from patronizing. It's time that we join together. We're at the place where we could be reconciled. But I'm going to have to get up. I'm going to have to stop bowing down. I'm going to have to give leadership. That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. He went to Europe the other week, and he was the leader of the world, the free world. He went to Latin America, and he shook hands with Chavez. He wasn't afraid of him. Do you understand? I think we at a whole new day and opportunity. And so this is a time that we could join together as equals, and do something about it. That's how I feel. Well, let me lift that up too. Flop for you.
Can we take about 15, 20 minutes or so for some feedback? Thank you. Now, I need help with the microphones. My understanding is that there are 2 microphones. Do the students, Stacy and Diamond, thank you so much. And please, if you don't mind, waiting until you have a microphone to ask a question. But please, now let's open up the conversation.
Dr. Perkins, thanks so much for being here. My name's John. I would like to ask you what you think about the whole policy, the whole war on drugs policy of the United States government over the last, what was it, started by Nixon, the first czar, and its effect on young, predominantly male African Americans, and what do you think American policy should be on that issue?
I probably feel about the same way you feel, but I don't have at this point a worked out solution, because I go to the prison. Yesterday was my day in prison, and as I've already said, of all of the young men that was there, it was only one white young man there, and drugs represent probably about 35 or 40% of the people in jail, and when you make that related, make it the fact that he stole a car and was high, it would go higher than that. So you would, if you took drugs out of the equator, you would probably have half of the blacks out of prison. And so it has been a war on the low level users within the community. But I think it's the problem is deeper than that. I think we went to it. The guys tell me that they smoke marijuana in the morning to make them think sane, and so it's their condition that they live in, and the contradiction in society, and the society tells them that this consumer need is going to satisfy them, and they don't have a good enough job to achieve that. So I think smoking marijuana is somewhat of an alternative to the reality in life. So I think the problem is deeper, I think it's deeper than just to reckon them up off in the street and lock them in jail, although that something like that would have to happen along with it, but the problem is much deeper than that. So just arresting them is not dealing with the problem. So it's not a comprehensive, holistic approach to this problem. We know too that I served for 16 years on Prison Fellowship Board, so I have this data. I still get the data on what's going on in prison in our society, and recidivism, that's going back after you come out, is still at about 70%. So we haven't mounted any program that are solving the problem in our society. So I suspect you and I feel the same way about what's going on. It's not comprehensive enough.
Gilbert has a question up here on the left, I think. Thank you.
Dr. Perkins, you've talked a little bit about all the problems and the African American community, the community in general, especially in respect to, I guess, the youth, because the youth are who become the adults. That's who shape the future. And I've read in one of your biographical accounts that a few decades ago you commissioned and were involved in the publishing of a high school textbook on the Bible and literature. And that was something that was very important to me when I read your biography. I'm from Northern Virginia, which is known to have great school systems, and never once in my entire education did I read something or learn something that made me want to follow biblical Christianity. Additionally, I'm currently an undergraduate religious studies major here at the University of Virginia. And you would think being a religious studies major that I would hear things that are encouraging to my faith, but most of the times that is not the case. So I'm very curious about what is your vision for that project?
Wow. I've been involved in a lot of book projects. One of the ones that I'm happy about is a book, my biography for fourth graders to read. I don't feel like,
I'm sorry, is that book out yet?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a part of a series of Zondervan on heroes of the faith, children's book. Now, what is happening? Seattle Pacific University has created the John Perkins Center for Reconciliation and Development, and that we are just into our third or fourth year of it. They envision that eventually that big part of that will be how do they develop curriculum that impacts justice and give and using sort of my center. These would be probably publications that come out of the center, but we haven't done anything that's exactly yet for. I think that people are using Let Justice Roll Down. High schoolers are using that for social studies, but curriculum, we haven't had much impact upon the curriculum, but we expect to do that later on. And one of the things two other pieces that I want to do a memoir that I hope it be big enough in my whole life story, but telling it in a different way. And then we want to commission an official biography. We would like to see it written in a way that it would reach the broader public, and that we would bring our Christian faith into the marketplace, that we probably wouldn't be explaining and talking exactly like being born again, and that we would be talking more like we talk tonight. I don't talk much like that anyway, but the Holy Spirit told me this, and that God said this to me. It won't have that kind of thing in it. It would be explaining. It wouldn't say nothing about predestination and premillennium and all those kind of things. But it would be something that somebody like you could read. Yeah.
Dr. Perkins, thank you so much for sharing your heart with us tonight. This is the first time I've heard you speak, and it's just been a great privilege. I've been thinking about the fact that it seems like that one of the most segregated times of the week is Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And it seems like our churches are really quite segregated, and even very committed Christians seem to worship separately. And I just wondered if you could say something about that. It seems like it shouldn't be that way.
Well, naturally, I would say I agree with you, and I agree the same way. But one of the encouragement I might have that you don't have is that there are, in most of the major cities I'm going into, there are new intentional movements. Sometimes they'll call it the emerging church, and they're happening in cities. I was in Knoxville. It's happening in Knoxville, in old Cabrini Green in Chicago, that used to be the center for when we talked about poverty. There is a church that are emerging there. So that is and that these young folks are rejecting the old, just the traditional, richer service, and they're becoming more. And that these people have a great love for the Word of God, and that there is new music that's coming out to accommodate that. there is great music being developed, and it's coming from this whole new movement. It's theological sound, and people are reading the Bible. So that I get some of that hope. But if I would just look out there at TV, if I were looking out there at the prosperity preachers, and if I were just looking at the Sunday morning sermons, and both in the white church and the black so-called church, you would see the same thing. I'd see the same thing. But there is a little undercurrent, and that's very encouraging, very encouraging. I met yesterday morning with the head of the Methodist mission for United Methodist Mission for Mississippi, and he is seeing that and seeing a sort of a new possibility of a reality. But they realize that they have got to join with the pain. Just to organize that would just give people a place of worship, but it wouldn't identify them with the pain, and they might be just satisfied with the good charisma, speaking. That's what the mega churches are doing. They got great personalities. They got great art now, theatric, and all of that is wonderful. And so people almost get satisfied when they go to their church. And so they grow, but we're not engaging that church with the pain of the people. Now there are some unique deals. Next week I work with Willow Creek, do some stuff with Willow Creek, and next week I'll be carrying them on a justice journey after I go to Washington and speak at this gathering in D.C. But I'm taking a group of people, and I do that all the time, where we go down and spend 5 days in Alabama and in the civil rights, where the civil rights took place. So there are some hopeful signs that I'm connected with, and so I see that, and that gives me enough hope. But I also see what you see. I also see what you see out there. And as I see this attention at this opportune time with us, I'm talking about us now having so much resources, and it's still focusing on ourselves, on our own prosperity. That's what, and that's what's killing me at my own black neighborhood level. They are going for this prosperity theology. It's unrelated to doing anything meaningful at the grassroots level, but people are packing, and they're getting the most educated of the young blacks out there. And I look on the parking lot, and it's full of Lexus and all those cars on a Sunday morning, but it's not related. Now, I think that God cares how much money you have. God ain't concerned about that. God is concerned about how you utilize it and how you invest it. He ain't concerned. That's the illustration, is what did the people do with the talent. And he gave them to the one who did the best thing with him. So I'm not talking about here you got to be poor. And I'm not talking about that. That ain't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about where do we direct our resources. Somebody will go around and say, John Perkins want to be, I told you I'm not poor. And I intended to break out of poverty from Mississippi, so I don't go around and pell that. Yeah.
There's a question right here. Is that Jackson? Okay, and then I think there was one over here. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Perkins, so glad that you're here tonight, and I'm trying to think how to phrase this question. I've just been doing a lot of thinking lately. I'm in Dr. Marsh's class, and we've been reading Quiet Revolution, and it's just really got my mind spinning a lot. So this is going to be more of a kind of honesty question more than sounding good question. So here goes, I guess. I guess I'm an undergraduate student here, like I said, and really have been starting to really have a heart just for racial reconciliation within the university life here, and just obviously on a grander scale, but within specifically my own environment that I'm seeing, and background that I've come from has been one, there's been so much racial tension. I'm from the South as well, and I've seen a lot with even my own family, within my friends, and it's something that's really starting to break my heart a lot. And I guess the question that I have is, what do you think are some practical steps that can be taken to start kind of that healing process? I think, I think a lot that's going on in the society now is political correctness. That's what people want. People, somebody says something on the news and they're fired, and it's like, oh, it's taken care of. And I don't think that's, addressing the issue. And I think the issue is we need to love one another, kind of like you've said in Quiet Blood Revolution, tough love. But how do we kind of go about having that tough love of one another and that real healing process?
Yeah, I like what you're saying. And you make me think of it. I don't think it was an accident. There was several people involved in my early day discipleship. There was an old Mama Wilson and Papa Wilson black couple, but it was this old Presbyterian, white Presbyterian elder that discipled me in my theological, biblical foundation. I think getting to have a friend of a different race, a real friend, and that's something you can do. And then depend on that person to help you. And I remember now more than ever that Mr. Leach would say to me, if I were you, this is what I would do. I look back now, and almost everything that he dreamed in me that he would have done, I've almost done that. So I think he helped me. You get the idea? And you will hear that. I heard that experience. Bill Hybel is going through this terrible struggle that he done ended up now with 30,000 white folks. and it was Al Bibb who gave him that. What's that book by the guys in Texas? Divided by Faith. Yeah, you know about all that. We worked together. May and I worked together. It was Al Bibb, another person, his friendship, their friendship. You get what I'm talking about? So what I'm saying, I think developing a friend and start there and listening there. I think March said that this afternoon. I know that place, and I know that equal with each one of the white leaders there in that community, there is a black counterpart that was free enough and was freed enough out of relationship that they could talk to each other. So I think that's discipleship is such an important thing. One of the things I would say what I'm doing with the main part of my life now is that we are turning our place, in addition to all other things we're doing, into a small retreat center where we invite people to come, and 6 to 12 people to come, and we spend 2 days or so together. So we'll welcome any of you who would like to do that, and we're focusing it more to work in groups. I'm trying to impact the collective body of Christ, not just individuals. I think you're getting some of that already, but I want, so we invite people to come down and spend 3 days or 2 days. In our Delta initiative, that's what we want to do there. We want to identify people in the Delta, bring those people into the city for a weekend, and give them an experience, and then send them back into the Delta. So we invite you to do that.
And if you're interested in that, you can write Christina Garcia Wade at the Project on Lived Theology or me, and we'll network you. We have only about 10 more minutes, and I know there was a question here.
Thanks so much for coming to Charlottesville. I wonder if for the folks that haven't heard you before,
I didn't hear you.
I wonder if for the folks that haven't ever heard you speak before, you could just say a few words about CCDA. We haven't really talked about your more recent work tonight. Could you share a little bit with this group about what you're doing through CCDA?
Yeah, CCDA is a Christian Community Development Association. And it's unique. It's so unique that people don't believe it, because we organize to give ourselves away. We reverse the pyramid. The basic pyramid of power is sending all the power at the top, and then it go down. We reverse that. We believe that the people with the problem, if given the support and nurture, that people can solve their own problem. So we really organize CCDA like that. It's an association of people coming together once a year, and that we do 4 days of both celebration and teaching in the different cities. And then we've also developed On the Road Institute that we do in different cities around the country. If a community wants to have an institute, they get together with 2 or 3 other organizations in that town, and then they invite it, and we have a curriculum that we go to those neighborhoods and community. And it's hard to believe that there is such a thing as an association that don't have some other agenda outside of helping the people within the community. You know, and that's the way we organize it, and it's going, and we invite, and it's not, we sit down together. It's cross-denominational. We sit down together and we come up with what we call some non-negotiables, and we organize that into a mission statement. It is not so, it has the great biblical truth that God was in Christ, and he reveals himself, and that he's the Son of God, that he's going to return someday. The great biblical truths, we have affirmed those. But as far as us looking at whether you baptize one way, another way, and all those things, or whether you speak in tongues or not speak in tongues, we don't deal with those issues at all. We try to equip the church with the great truths and with the practical environment of being concerned for the poor. We don't never do that. And we also just read and teach the Bible. That's what I do there. When you come there, for each morning, I read and teach the Bible to the people. So what we're really trying to do is learn how to live out the Bible. The Bible said it's not they that hear the word will be blessed, but they that do the word will be blessed. And so we want to become doers of the word, because it says so there that if you become a hearer of it and not a doer, you will deceive yourself, and you will think that hearing is good as doing. And so you come together, we're back at the Sunday morning. We can hear the word in a black church, we can hear the word in a white church, we can hear the word. So what? The hearing is what it is. But when you begin to do reconciliation, you begin to do those texts, that makes the difference in the world. That's CCDA, and we welcome you. We will meet this year in Cincinnati. It'll be about September the 20-something or so, and it's ccda.org or something like that. Y'all know how to do that. I can't even get my phone on, much less all the computer. But CCDA is, I sort of want the John Perkins Foundation to go on after me. That will be left to my people who inherit it after me. I'm trying to fix that so it can happen, because I think it's an inner part of what CCDA is all about. But what I want to leave is CCDA. I want to leave something that I was given away to the bigger public here in the world, and believe in the inherited dignity of the people with the problem. Believe that bringing those people, we have a slogan, CCDA, and I finish. Slogan in CCDA, we says, go to the people, live among them, love them, learn from them, plan with them, start with what they know, build on what they have, and of the best leaders, when our work is finished, our task is done, we want the people to say we've done it ourselves. We believe in the inherited dignity of the people with the problem, and we come along to help them. So people have been living in villages. I've been around the world, and people have been living in villages for ages, solving their problem for ages. Cities are solving their problem. They get me out in Seattle to speak sometime. They want me to solve their problem, and Seattle is developing the most sophisticated city in the world, and they get a third grader to come out there. I believe they can solve them problems. I think they got the possibility out there. They got Microsoft and all of those people out there. You get the idea? So you got to believe in inherited dignity and affirm the people and get them to release the resources within those neighborhoods and community. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you again.